Good day from the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, which in the wee hours of a Saturday morning would usually be somewhat devoid of activity on a crew off-duty day, but this morning is the scene of cautionary vigilance as Flight Director Chris Edelin and his Orbit 1 team of flight controllers monitor the approach of a small chunk of space debris in the vicinity of the station that prompted the precautionary sheltering of the 6 crew members in their respective Soyuz spacecraft. Late Friday night, Flight Director Jerry Jason decided to place the station crew in their Soyuz vehicles for a short period of time after ballistics specialists received data that showed a remote possibility of a conjunction with a small piece of a Russian Cosmos satellite. Although we will likely see that the debris will be no threat to the station and the crew, very few tracking passes were received on this object Friday due to its eccentric orbit and its relatively small size. So, taking a precautionary and prudent approach, Jason decided to place the 6 crew members in their Soyuz return craft until the space junk would pass. The crew was awakened at 10:40 p.m. Central Time Friday night to begin preparations just about an hour or so before their normal wake-up time for a Saturday. The Cosmos satellite debris of interest today is one of the fragments from the satellite's collision on February 10, 2009, with an Iridium satellite that attracted worldwide attention. The debris was initially tracked Friday morning, but the timing of the notification to the flight control team of a possible conjunction came at a point that precluded planning for an avoidance maneuver to steer clear of the object, the size of which has not yet been conclusively determined, even though the trajectory operations officer here in Mission Control has categorized the object as small. As of this hour, the debris is predicted to miss the station by an overall distance of between 11 and 14 kilometers, and with a radial miss distance that has fluctuated throughout the day, now estimated to range up to about 100 meters or so, either above or below the so-called three-dimensional box that the ballistics officers use in tracking the close approach of an object to the International Space Station. The station, in this view from cameras on the truss of the Orbital laboratory, is orbiting at an altitude of 244 statute miles, moving from northwest to southeast across the Indian Ocean, soon to cross the western coast of the continent of Australia. The time of closest approach of this piece of space debris is just 20 minutes and 45 seconds away at 1:38 and 33 seconds a.m. Central Time. The station at that time will be flying at an altitude of 244 statute miles just to the south of New Zealand. NASA's Expedition 30 Commander Dan Burbank and his Russian cosmonaut crewmates Anton Shkaplerov and Anatoly Ivanishin are in their Soyuz TMA-22 spacecraft that is attached to the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Zvezda service module. Meanwhile, cosmonaut Oleg Kononenko, NASA's Don Pettit, and Andrei Kuipers of the European Space Agency are settled into their Soyuz TMA-03M spacecraft that is attached to the Rassvet module on the Earth-facing side of the Zarya module to wait for the debris to pass, after which they will exit their respective spacecraft and resume their normal duties. Again, it is serendipitous that this sheltering activity is occurring on a crew off-duty day with no impact to scientific research or any other crew work. This is the third time in station history that a crew has had to shelter in their Soyuz return craft due to the possibility of a conjunction with orbital debris, the first sheltering of a crew since June of 2011. Meanwhile, while this activity is ongoing, the European Space Agency's Eduardo Amaldi automated transfer vehicle cargo craft continues a flawless flight to the station, having launched from the Arianespace launch site in Kourou, French Guiana, about 26 hours ago. The cargo craft will dock to the aft port of the Zvezda service module at 5:32 p.m. Central Time this coming Wednesday. With the 6 crew members now inside their respective Soyuz spacecraft, hatches to the respective U.S. and Russian segments of the station were closed a short time ago, and the actual hatch closing of each of the 2 Soyuz spacecraft will occur at the bottom of the hour about 10 minutes from now, some 8 minutes before the time of closest approach of this chunk of Cosmos satellite debris. Again, this is a very prudent and conservative approach. For the crew, this particular object did not have particularly good tracking because of the small size of the object and because of the odd nature of its orbit. And so the prudent thing to do in the eyes of the flight control team here in Houston was to shelter the crew, just to be absolutely sure that all steps had been taken to protect the crew in the highly unlikely event that this piece of debris would come into contact with the structure of the International Space Station. Various views of the International Space Station from cameras on the truss of the orbital complex. You're looking at the cupola that provides a 360-degree view of the world from its turret-like structure that is attached to the U.S. segment of the International Space Station, which is currently approaching the western coast of Australia, moving from northwest to southeast at an altitude of 244 statute miles, 17 minutes away from the time of closest approach. Part of the preparations that are normal fare for one of these sheltering operations include the positioning of the solar arrays, locking them in place at the proper orientation, as well as the securing of the environmental control systems in both the U.S. and Russian segments of the station in the highly unlikely event of an impact from this small piece of debris. Once the debris passes, the crews will back out of these sheltering procedures that they have trained for on the ground and for which they conduct on-orbit training on a periodic basis from time to time. We'll regain our television signal momentarily. We're on a handover between satellites and the tracking and data relay satellite system. Commander Dan Burbank and his two Russian crewmates who he launched with from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan back in November. Soyuz Commander Anton Shkaplerov and Flight Engineer Anatoly Ivanishin, once again inside their Soyuz TMA-22 spacecraft that is attached to the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Zvezda service module of the Russian segment of the station. They are due to return to Earth in late April to complete 5.5 months on board the orbital outpost. The other three crew members who were launched in late December to the station, NASA's Don Pettit, Oleg Kononenko in the middle of this crew portrait, who is the Soyuz commander for the TMA-03M spacecraft, and on the right, Andrei Kuipers of the European Space Agency, are snugly fit inside the descent module of the Soyuz TMA-03M that is docked to the Rassvet module of the International Space Station. They are scheduled to return to Earth on July 1st. In the center of your picture, docked to Rassvet, that is the 03M spacecraft in which Don Pettit, Andrei Kuipers, and Oleg Kononenko are housed at the moment. On the far left, attached to the Pirs docking compartment, is the 46 Progress resupply vehicle, the Russian cargo craft that will be undocking from the International Space Station on April 19th. And deorbited to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. It will be replaced a few days later by the Progress 47 cargo craft, a brand new resupply vehicle that will launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on April 20th and dock to that same Pirs docking compartment port on Sunday, April 22nd. The 6 crew members following the closest approach of this object to the station. Once it passes the station, will have the rest of the weekend of essentially off-duty time, some minor maintenance and housekeeping activities to perform, the usual Earth observation work that they do on a daily basis as they gear up for the arrival of the European Space Agency's huge Eduardo Amaldi cargo craft that is scheduled to dock to the station at 5:32 p.m. Central Time next Wednesday. The Eduardo Amaldi is equipped with more than 7 tons of food, fuel, and supplies for the 6 crew members of the International Space Station. It will dock automatically to the aft port of the Zvezda service module. The Eduardo Amaldi will spend about 6 months docked to the Russian segment of the International Space Station. It can be used, if required, to maneuver the station or reboost the station from time to time. Things gearing up on the station for an almost unprecedented level of vehicle traffic back and forth. One of the highlights, of course, being the much anticipated launch of the first commercial cargo vehicle, the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft, that will be launched on a Falcon 9 rocket from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station on April 30th.
Коля, 6:33.
6:33. I will half close both hatches. That's correct. Oleg? КВД, I want to check with you. Is it in electric mode? Yes, it is in electric mode. Okay, and the cap is removed, correct? Yeah, the cap and clamps are removed. That's correct. Okay, very good.
You're listening to the interpretation of Oleg Kononenko as he talks to flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside Moscow, preparing to close the hatch to the TMA-03M spacecraft that he, Andrei Kuipers, and Don Pettit are currently sheltered.
So then we'll half close both hatches and go to the descent module. So I close those both hatches, airman, SO, and then go to descent module, SR. That's correct. Okay, I'll copy all.
Coming up on 10 minutes until the time of closest approach for this fragment of Russian Cosmos satellite debris.
Так, а может быть, handle. А если нам надо будет ее срочно закрыть?
Антон, у вас, наверное, тангенты зажаты или чего? Или как?
Наверное. Anton, I think you are pressing the tangent because we can hear all this noise.
Can you see? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's it, Tom. Да.
You heard Don Pettit there speaking in Russian. The crew in good spirits. This activity posing very little impact on their workday. Again, they were awakened a little over an hour earlier than their normal wake-up time, but once the closest approach is over and done with, the crew will back out of these sheltering procedures and have a relaxing weekend ahead of them. The International Space Station and its 6 crew members now flying just to the south of Tasmania.
You know which direction it comes from?
Yeah. No.
I mean, what relative speed? Do you know that?
No,
What the relative speed is?
No. Maybe the same 7 kilometers per second. You may be at the same, exactly. But
I understand
how many
number after point. Yeah. And from which direction? Yeah, we don't know.
Anton, слышишь нас, нет?
Да, конечно.
Anton, do you copy? How can you hear us? Quite well, thank you.
Coming up on the 6-minute mark to the time of closest approach, which again is 1:38 and 33 seconds a.m. Central Time of this small fragment of Cosmos satellite debris. The 2 crews in their respective Soyuz vehicles are equipped with cameras and have been given what is expected to be the trajectory of this object based on the best guess at tracking from the trajectory operations officer and the pointing officer, as well as the other flight control positions here in mission control. In the event that something can be seen, they will be at the ready to try to capture it.
Так, СУП Москвы, 9:33.
Все, Олег и Антон.
9:33. Okay. Let's
Принято.
have closed the hatches and go to descent module. Okay, we copy.
And the hatch is now closed in each of the Soyuz vehicles per the procedures, with 5 minutes to go until the time of closest approach.
СУП Москвы. Люки
MCC Moscow.
закрыты.
The hatches of Soyuz 232 are half closed.
Правильно?
Да, прикрыто.
Yes, half closed. Copy.
Москвы. МИМ-1 СУ прикрыт.
MRM-1 SU closed? Half closed. Okay, we copy.
Люк САБУ открыт.
SABO hatches opened. Okay.
Coming up on the 3-minute mark until the time of closest approach. The 2 crews are well into their procedures. They're in their respective Soyuz vehicles with the hatches closed, everything in order.
Ребята, в иллюминаторы
for them to monitor the time that will come and go of the closest approach of this small piece of Cosmos satellite debris.
And observing through their windows.
Coming up on about 90 seconds until the time of closest approach, the trajectory operations officer estimates that this small object will be moving from the port side of the station to the starboard side of the station and in front of the complex.
9:37 now. Yes.
Station gets around to about 1 minute from PCA. We expect the object to be moving from port to starboard in front of the vehicle.
Good news. Dark connection.
I don't see anything. Which is the good news.
Flight controllers standing by here in mission control. Just 30 seconds to go until the time of closest approach.
1 second.
Ничего.
Nothing.
I hope. Pettit bill.
Looks like that's it.
Хорошая новость.
Ну, в общем-то, да.
Еще 1 минутку. Еще 1 минутку.
The trajectory operations officer has told Flight Director Chris Edelin that we have passed the time of closest approach. Flight Director Chris Edelin is talking to his Russian counterpart at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside Moscow. To his right is Capcom Shel Lindgren. Edelin informing the Russian flight director in Korolyov that the green light has been given for the crew to back out of their sheltering procedures and to begin the process of reopening the hatches with the piece of Cosmos satellite debris having come and gone with no threat to the International Space Station. So the sheltering exercise has been completed with due diligence and in a very precautionary and conservative fashion. The 6 crew members of the International Space Station were directed to shelter in their respective Soyuz vehicles for a short period of time this morning. But everything went by the book, and as expected, the small piece of Cosmos satellite debris passed the International Space Station without incident.
Install the clamps and restore ventilation. But please let us know when you install the clamps.
Хорошо.
Okay, we'll do that.
Хорошо, принято.
And then we'll need to change COM into nominal config. Okay, very good.
Так, Коля, У-11 выдаем или нет?
Нет, Антон.
U11 command.
So here in Mission Control, it will take the better part of the next hour for the two crews to complete their back out of their sheltering procedures and to move out of their Soyuz vehicles back into their the U.S. and Russian segments of the station and open those hatches to resume a normal and relaxing weekend for themselves. That'll wrap up our coverage of this morning's sheltering of the International Space Station crew in their Soyuz vehicles to allow a small piece of Russian Cosmos satellite debris to pass the station. It did so without incident at 1:38 and 33 seconds a.m. Central Time this morning. So we'll close with a couple of programming notes. Our coverage of Expedition 30 activities aboard the International Space Station will resume on Monday morning at 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, with our ISS Update Commentary Hour to bring you up to date on all of the activities for the 6 crew members on board the Orbital Laboratory. One of the highlights of the coming week will be the arrival of the Eduardo Amaldi automated transfer vehicle, the European Space Agency's large cargo craft that was launched from the Arianespace launch site in Kourou, French Guiana, in the wee hours of Friday morning. The ATV-3, as it is called, is well on its way to the station, executing in automated fashion its rendezvous burns to fine-tune its path to the International Space Station. It will arrive on Wednesday, March 28th, with our coverage of its docking to the aft port of the Zvezda service module scheduled to begin at 4:45 p.m. Central Time, 5:45 p.m. Eastern Time. That will set up the ATV-3 for its link-up to the Zvezda service module at 5:32 p.m. Central Time, 6:32 p.m. Eastern Time this coming Wednesday, March 28th. For now, we'll wrap it up here at the Johnson Space Center. The 6 crew members on board the International Space Station getting out of their Soyuz vehicles and will have a relaxing off-duty period over the rest of their weekend. For our colleagues, have a nice weekend. This is Mission Control, Houston.